The day I found blood on the collar of my wife's blouse, everything started unraveling. It wasn't like I was snooping, either. I was about to toss the clothes into the washer like I always did on Sundays. That shirt, white, silk, a bit more expensive than she normally wore, was buried deep under a pile of laundry. I remember picking it up and seeing that little stain, bright red against the white, staring back at me like it was daring me to notice it. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself it was just a bit of lipstick or maybe a spill from one of her client meetings. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. My wife, Lila, had always been organized, meticulous, and precise. We'd been married long enough for me to know her patterns, her little habits. And if I had learned anything over the years, it was that Lila didn't slip up. She was like clockwork. So, finding that stain on a shirt she had worn only once, a shirt I didn't even remember seeing her wear, didn't sit right with me. It was like one of those movies where a tiny clue disrupts a whole story, except this was my life. That night, as she brushed her teeth in the bathroom, I found myself watching her reflection in the mirror, analyzing her every move, looking for something, anything, that would explain the stain. Lila was humming to herself, casual and oblivious, like she didn't have a care in the world. That little red mark had been driving me crazy for hours, and here she was, as serene as ever, ready to slip under the covers next to me like nothing was wrong. The next day, I left work early. Something about that bloodstain kept gnawing at me, and I couldn't just let it go. It had only been a day, but I was already running on fumes, mind racing through endless questions with no answers. Lila hadn't given any sign that anything was off. That morning, she was her usual self, giving me a peck on the cheek as she headed out for work, dressed sharp as ever, in another one of her perfectly pressed blouses. When I got home, I didn't even bother with pleasantries or try to act like things were normal. I wasn't in the mood for pretending. I went straight to the laundry room, grabbing the blouse with the bloodstain. Holding it up, I studied it closely under the light again. I checked the collar, the inside of the sleeves, the seams, looking for anything else unusual. There was nothing. No rips, no loose threads, just that tiny, dried smudge on the collar. It was small, but it was enough to flip my entire world upside down. If it was a spill, it should have been on the front. If it was lipstick, why would it be so high up? Feeling ridiculous, I tossed the blouse back onto the counter and went to the kitchen. I needed to calm down and think straight. I poured myself a coffee and sat there, staring out the window, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But my gut wouldn't let it go. I kept replaying the last few weeks, looking for anything odd that I might have missed. And there were things, now that I thought about it. Lila's sudden work dinners that popped up out of nowhere. Her long showers as soon as she got home. The quietness between us that I'd blamed on stress, on life, on anything but what it might actually be. I thought about calling her, just to hear her voice, maybe ask her a few questions casually, see if she slipped up. But no, I needed more than that. If I just asked her outright, she'd have an answer ready. Lila was always quick with her words, fast on her feet. She'd talk circles around me until I was the one feeling guilty for even asking. I needed something concrete. If I was wrong, I'd look like an idiot, but if I was right, I didn't know what I'd do if I was right. So, I waited. I tried to act normal, keeping things steady for the kids when they got home from school, asking them about their day, helping them with their homework, all the usual routines. But my mind was miles away, locked onto that stain and what it could mean. By the time Lila finally came home, I'd gone over every possible scenario. She walked in like it was any other day, tossing her purse onto the couch, and giving me a tired smile. But I could see something in her eyes, a flicker of something she didn't want me to see. And that flicker told me everything. So, I said, trying to sound casual, "How was work?" She paused, just for a second, then smiled wider. "Busy as usual," she replied, kicking off her shoes. "Meetings all day. I'm exhausted." It was a standard answer, one she'd given 100 times before. But this time, it felt like a lie. I watched her closely, noting the way she avoided my gaze, the way she kept moving around, fidgeting with her earrings, her hair, her purse, anything to avoid looking directly at me. "Meetings, huh?" I said, keeping my tone even. With anyone interesting? She gave a light laugh, but there was a strain to it. Nope. Just the usual clients. The lie was so smooth, so casual, that if I hadn't already been on edge, I might have believed her. But the way she answered without missing a beat, without even thinking, that wasn't Lila. She'd usually go off about the people she met, how exhausting they were, or how funny they'd been. But tonight, nothing. Just that blank, rehearsed answer. I nodded, trying not to let my suspicions show. You know, you left one of your blouses in the laundry, I said, watching her reaction carefully. Oh? She barely glanced at me, walking over to pour herself a glass of water. Which one? I described the blouse, the one with the bloodstain. She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. But she recovered quickly, taking a long sip of water and giving me a shrug. Oh, that one. Must have just been something I spilled. I felt a rush of anger, so strong I had to clench my fists to keep myself steady. It was a spill. Just like that, no questions, no surprise. Just a throwaway excuse to brush it off. For the next few days, I watched her like a hawk, waiting for more signs, more clues. She'd gotten careful, though. She wasn't leaving anything to chance. Her schedule became even more erratic, late nights, early mornings, the works. And every time she came home, she'd go straight to the bathroom, locking the door for a long time, running the water as if she was washing off something she didn't want me to know about. I hated myself for doing it, but I started checking our finances, looking through her stuff when she wasn't around. I scoured our bank accounts, credit card statements, her emails. Nothing. No suspicious charges, no hotel bookings, no unexplained purchases. If she was hiding something, she was good at it. She left no trail, no traces. Just that one single bloodstain that I couldn't let go of. Then, on a Wednesday night, something changed. Lila had come home late again, just after midnight. She looked tired, worn out, but there was something else in her eyes, a look I hadn't seen before. She barely spoke, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before heading straight for the bathroom as usual. But tonight, I wasn't going to let her slip away that easily. I stood outside the bathroom door, listening to the sound of the water running, waiting for her to come out. When she finally did, she was dressed in her robe, her hair damp. She looked surprised to see me standing there, as if she hadn't expected me to wait. You okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She gave me a tired smile. Yeah, just a long day. You seem to have a lot of those lately. She narrowed her eyes slightly, sensing the accusation behind my words. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said, trying to brush it off. Just feels like you're working yourself to death. She sighed, looking away. Well, someone has to, right? That little comment, casual, but loaded, hit me like a slap to the face. It was the first time she'd let her guard down, the first time she'd let me see that something was off. But before I could say anything else, she brushed past me, heading for the bedroom. I watched her go, feeling a surge of frustration. She was shutting me out, keeping me at arm's length, and I didn't know why. But I was done waiting, done playing this game. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. I left the house early, before she woke up, and drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to figure out what to do. I considered hiring a private investigator, but something about that felt wrong. This was my wife, my life, and I needed to confront it head-on. So instead, I decided to take a risk. That afternoon, I made an excuse to leave work early, telling my boss I had a family emergency. Then, I went home, parking a few blocks away so Lila wouldn't see my car. I settled in, waiting for her to come home. Hours passed, but I didn't move. I just sat there, watching, waiting. Finally, just before sunset, I saw her car pull into the driveway. She sat there for a moment, not getting out, as if she was gathering herself, preparing for something. Then she opened the door and stepped out, looking around briefly before heading toward the front door. I stayed in my spot, watching as she went inside. She was alone, but there was something different about her. She looked tense, like she was hiding something, like she knew she was being watched. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just imagining things. She was hiding something big. And whatever it was about to tear our whole life apart. When I got home that night, it felt like there was an invisible wall between us. Lila was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, focused on some cooking show she had running on her phone. For a second, I just stood there, watching her, trying to recognize the woman I thought I knew. She glanced up, gave me a quick smile, and went right back to her cooking. "Smells good," I said, walking over to the counter. I was trying to act casual, but my whole body was tense, every nerve on edge. "It's just pasta," she replied, not looking up. "I got home late, so I didn't have time for anything special." "Late night again?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "Yeah," she said quickly, her voice a little too casual. "Client meeting ran over. These people think I have all the time in the world." I nodded, watching her closely. She still wouldn't look at me. "Funny," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I called your office around 5, and they said you'd left early." Her hand froze on the spoon, just for a split second, before she kept stirring. "Oh, yeah, I had to meet them off-site," she said, her voice cool. "They wanted to see a few properties." "And you didn't think to mention that to me?" She shrugged, still focused on her cooking. "Didn't think it was a big deal." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Right. Just, did a lot of things today, huh?" "Yeah," she replied, her tone clipped now. "Like I said, busy day." "Busy day," I repeated, stepping closer. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "So busy you didn't have time to clean up that shirt from last night?" She finally looked up at me, her face blank, but her eyes hard. "What are you talking about?" "The shirt, Lila," I said, my voice rising. "The one with the blood on the collar. The one you tried to pass off as a spill." Her face went pale, just for a moment, before she forced a small laugh. "Are you serious? You're making a big deal out of some tiny stain?" I took a step closer, not breaking eye contact. "I'm making a big deal out of you lying to my face." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're being paranoid, Luke. It's just a shirt. You're acting like you're hiding something," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Because you are." She stared at me, her expression hardening. "What exactly do you think I'm hiding?" I was done tiptoeing around it. "You tell me, Lila. You leave early, you come home late, you lie about where you are, you tell me what's going on." She sighed, putting down the spoon and crossing her arms, her eyes narrowed. "Unbelievable. I'm killing myself at work, trying to keep up with everything, and now you're accusing me of what? Cheating?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, waiting for her to keep going, to slip up. But she just stared back at me, defiant. "Is that what you think?" she asked, her voice low and angry. "That I'm sneaking around behind your back? That I'm doing something terrible just because I'm working late? Are you?" I shot back, my voice shaking. "Because I've seen the way you act lately, Lila. The way you come home and barely say a word, the way you lock yourself in the bathroom like you're washing off something you don't want me to know about. So, yeah, I'm asking." She laughed, but it was a cold, bitter sound. "This is insane. I've been working my ass off to keep this family going, and this is what I get? Suspicion? Accusations? Don't act like this is out of nowhere," I snapped. "You're the one who started acting strange. You're the one who's been hiding things." She glared at me, her hands clenched into fists. "You know what? Maybe if you spent half as much energy actually helping out around here instead of playing detective, I wouldn't have to pick up all the slack." The comment hit me like a slap, but I kept my voice steady. "This isn't about chores, Lila. Don't try to turn this around on me." "Oh, so now I'm not allowed to defend myself," she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You get to accuse me of whatever you want, and I just have to sit here and take it?" "I'm asking you for the truth," I said, struggling to keep my voice from shaking. I deserve that much, don't I? She stared at me, her expression hard and unyielding. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, both of us breathing hard, the tension thick in the air. And then, finally, she spoke. Fine, she said, her voice low. You want the truth? Here it is. She took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with anger. Yes, I lied. Yes, I've been working late. And yes, I met someone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, like everything I thought I knew had been ripped away. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling like I was drowning. I'm sorry, she said, her voice flat. I didn't want it to come out like this, but you pushed me. I clenched my fists, my whole body shaking with anger. You've been seeing someone else? She looked away, her expression unreadable. It wasn't supposed to be serious. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my voice rising. You don't just happen to cheat on someone, Lila. You made a choice. She sighed, crossing her arms. Look, I know I messed up. I'm not denying that. But things haven't exactly been great between us, have they? I felt a surge of rage. So this is my fault now? You're blaming me for your affair? I'm not blaming you, she said, her voice hard. I'm just saying things haven't been working for a long time. Maybe if you'd been paying more attention, you would have noticed. That was it. The last straw. I felt something inside me snap, and before I knew it, I was yelling. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I shouted, my voice echoing in the kitchen. You're the one who went behind my back, you're the one who lied, and now you're trying to make this about me? She flinched, but quickly recovered, her eyes blazing. Fine. You want to blame me? Go ahead. But don't act like you're some perfect victim here, Luke. You're not exactly a saint. Saint or not, I didn't betray you, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I didn't break our marriage vows. She crossed her arms, her expression cold. You want to know why? Because you're too busy being the good husband to actually notice when things are falling apart. I was done. I couldn't listen to another word. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading for the door, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here, couldn't stay in the same room as her for another second. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice hard. Out, I replied, not looking back. I can't even look at you right now. I slammed the door behind me, barely noticing the cold night air as I walked down the driveway. My mind was a blur, my emotions a chaotic mess of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I'd known something was wrong, but hearing her say the words out loud, hearing her admit to it, it was like a knife to the heart. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind replaying every word, every moment, over and over again. Part of me wanted to go back, to keep fighting, to make her explain every detail. But another part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. She'd betrayed me, and no amount of explanations or excuses would make it right. When I finally made it back to the house, the lights were off, and everything was quiet. I slipped inside, my mind still reeling, my heart still pounding. I went upstairs, not even bothering to check if she was still awake. I just needed to get away from her, to put as much distance between us as possible. I shut the bedroom door behind me, sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. I thought I could handle the truth, that I could confront her and make sense of it all. But now, sitting here alone in the darkness, I realized just how much she'd broken me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was the end of everything I thought I knew. The next morning, I woke up with a bitter clarity. I'd barely slept, the whole night spent going over every word, every lie, every single hint I'd ignored along the way. But this wasn't just going to be another day of wallowing. No. I was going to do something about it. She wasn't up yet, or maybe she was just avoiding me. Either way, it didn't matter. I went downstairs, took out my laptop, and started putting together a plan. If she wanted to tear apart our marriage, our family, fine, then she'd see what it was like to have her life ripped apart in return. I didn't want to just leave, not yet. Walking away would give her the freedom to twist the story however she wanted. She'd make it sound like I abandoned her, like she was the victim of my coldness, or whatever excuse she had cooked up. No, this wasn't going to end cleanly. If she wanted out of our marriage, then she would feel the weight of that decision, every single day. I went through every bill, every document, every shared account we had. I knew our finances inside and out, but this time, I looked at it through a different lens. Instead of thinking about what would help us build a future together, I was focused on how to dismantle hers. First things first, I'd put a hold on all her access to our joint account. I knew she had some savings of her own, probably hidden for months, if not years, in preparation for this, but she'd be scrambling without immediate access to our main funds. I could practically see her face when she'd try to use her card and find it declined. Then I called up our internet provider, acting friendly as I requested a temporary suspension for the Wi-Fi, citing security reasons. She'd be lost without her precious phone and her constant messages from whoever her little fling was. For good measure, I had them change the password on the account so only I could restore service. Next, I took my phone and called our shared insurance provider, acting as if I was making routine changes to our plan. I told them that I was the sole policyholder and needed to adjust her coverage to the minimum. Legally, I'd still be covering her, but the difference was this: any claim she'd make now would be subject to approval directly from me. Petty? Maybe. But it was just the beginning. Then came the email accounts. We'd set up a few shared accounts for bills, home management, and other shared things over the years, and she still used those emails. I made sure to change the passwords on every single one, wiping out her access to everything that tied us together. Then I set up a meeting with my lawyer. It was the same lawyer I'd had on retainer for years, old family friend who knew everything there was to know about my finances, about our assets, and, importantly, about divorce proceedings. When I told him what was happening, he listened, then nodded calmly, laying out the steps we'd need to take to make sure I came out of this clean. I'd done my homework the night before and had every document he'd need in a folder. He told me I was thorough, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't in the mood for compliments. By the time I was done with all the calls and emails, the house was still quiet. I checked the time. Lila was definitely up by now, but she hadn't come downstairs. No texts from her either. Probably wondering why her phone had gone dead without Wi-Fi. It was almost laughable. But I wasn't finished. There was one more step, one that would make her see exactly what I thought of her little betrayal. I went upstairs and knocked on the bathroom door. "Lila," I called, my voice cold and controlled. "I think we should talk." There was a pause, then the sound of the lock turning. She opened the door, looking wary but trying to mask it with a half-hearted smile. "About last night," she started, trying to keep her tone soft. I know things got heated. I held up a hand to stop her. "No, Lila. You don't get to play innocent here. We're way past that." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "So what are you planning to do, Luke? Are you going to hold this over my head forever?" I took a deep breath, watching her carefully. "Actually, I've already started doing something. You might want to check your bank account later today." The color drained from her face, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear there. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly. "I made sure you won't be able to just take off and leave with half of everything, if that's what you're worried about," I replied calmly. "You're not walking out of here like this is some temporary game. You decided to break our family, so you're going to feel exactly what that means." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the right words. "Luke, this is insane. I messed up, okay? I know I messed up. But you can't just freeze me out of everything. Watch me," I said, not even flinching. "You don't get to pick and choose when you want to be married to me. You don't get to cheat and lie and then pretend you're the one who's been wronged. You wanted this? Then fine. We're done. But it's going to be on my terms." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're pathetic," you know that? You think you can control everything, like this marriage was some little game that you owned. But it doesn't work that way, Luke. You don't own me. No, I agreed, my voice calm and steady. But I own a lot more than you think. And I'm going to make sure you don't forget that. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she kept her mouth shut, clearly trying to think of some response, some way to talk her way out of this. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. I turned and left, leaving her standing there in the hallway, speechless. Downstairs, I grabbed my car keys and headed out, not bothering to tell her where I was going. I had one more errand to run, one that would ensure I had everything in place when the dust settled. I drove across town to our kids' school. The principal was a friend of mine, someone I'd known for years, and I'd made arrangements for the kids to stay with me during the upcoming transition, as the lawyer had called it. I wanted to make sure they were kept out of this mess as much as possible, but I wasn't going to let them stay under her roof if she was planning to bring some other guy into their lives. When I got back home, Lila was waiting for me, her face a mixture of anger and desperation. She looked like she wanted to say something, to lash out, but I just brushed past her, ignoring her attempt to start yet another argument. Are you going to ignore me now, too? She snapped, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, my expression cold. There's nothing left to say, Lila. You wanted out, you got it. But don't think for a second that you get to control how this ends. Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't reply. Instead, she turned and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. I could hear her footsteps pounding up the stairs, but I didn't care. She could have her little tantrum. She could sulk and rage all she wanted. I wasn't backing down. Over the next few days, I put everything in place. Every bank account, every shared asset, every legal loophole I could find, I used it all to make sure I was one step ahead of her. My lawyer was relentless, finding every angle, every advantage that would put me in control of our assets. I even went as far as to put the house in a separate trust, effectively locking her out of any claim she might try to make on it. Meanwhile, Lila was forced to watch as everything she thought she could count on slipped out of her grasp. She tried to argue, to fight back, but it was useless. I had everything covered, every angle checked. And the best part? She had no idea what was coming. Then, one night, after the kids were in bed, she came downstairs, her face pale, her eyes hollow. Luke, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk? I looked up from my laptop, barely glancing at her. About what? She took a shaky breath, looking away. About this. Us. Maybe we don't have to go through with this. Maybe we can. I don't know, work something out. I raised an eyebrow, watching her closely. You want to work something out now? After everything? She nodded, her eyes filled with a desperation I hadn't seen before. I just don't want to lose everything, okay? I made a mistake, I know that. But we can fix this, right? I felt a surge of satisfaction, but I kept my expression neutral. You want to fix it now that you're losing everything? Funny how that works. She looked at me, her face crumpling. Please, Luke. Don't do this. I held her gaze, my voice steady. You made this choice, Lila. And now you're going to live with it. I watched as she walked away, defeated. She thought she could get away with it, that I'd forgive and forget like nothing had happened. But I wasn't going to be that guy. Not this time. And as I watched her retreat up the stairs, I knew one thing for certain, I'd won. The following evening, I came home to find Lila sitting in the living room, waiting for me. She hadn't looked at me like this in years, eyes red, clutching a mug with both hands, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything had finally landed on her. But I felt nothing looking at her, not even a flicker of pity. We need to talk, she said quietly. I dropped my bag by the door and shrugged. What's left to say? She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the mug so tightly I thought it might break. Luke, I know you're hurt. I know I messed up, in ways I can't even explain, but, her voice trailed off, and she looked down. I don't want to throw everything away. I know you don't either. I watched her, my face expressionless. Maybe I don't want to throw it away, Lila. But you did. You threw it away when you decided I wasn't enough. She closed her eyes, the shame finally showing in her face. I know. I know I did, and I can't change that. But don't you think it's worth at least trying to fix? Fix what? I asked, my tone harsh. You think we can patch things up and pretend nothing happened? No, her voice cracked. But maybe we don't have to end like this. Like strangers. The silence between us grew heavy, the weight of everything unsaid filling the room. After a moment, she finally spoke again. Luke, do you even care what drove me to do it? She asked, her voice almost pleading. Do you care why? I looked at her, feeling a mix of disgust and curiosity. Sure, Lila. Tell me. Tell me why it was so easy to turn your back on me, on us. She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling around the mug. It wasn't easy, Luke. I didn't just wake up one day and decide to do this. It was a series of things. Small things that piled up. Like what? She hesitated, glancing down at her hands before meeting my gaze again. I felt like I was losing myself. Like I was just a part of your life, but not my own person. You're always so focused, so controlled. And I was always trying to keep up, to be the person you wanted me to be. I felt trapped. I scoffed, shaking my head. So you felt trapped, and cheating was your way out? That's a pathetic excuse, Lila. You didn't have to go behind my back. She swallowed, her eyes wet with tears. I know. I know it sounds pathetic. But I felt invisible. I thought if I found something outside of us, maybe I'd feel alive again. Alive, I repeated bitterly. You couldn't feel alive with me? With your family? She winced, looking away. It's not that I didn't love you, Luke. I do. I always have. But I lost myself somewhere along the way. And he was there. He made me feel noticed. So that's what this is, I said coldly. It's about attention. Her shoulders slumped, defeated. Maybe it was. I don't know anymore. I just know I hurt you, hurt us, and I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, I said, my voice hard. You can't take it back. You made a choice, and now you want to be forgiven because you're finally feeling the consequences. That's not how it works, Lila. She looked down, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Luke. I don't know what else to say. I just don't want to lose everything. I stood there, staring at her, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anger. So this is about you, isn't it? Not about what you did to me. It's about you not wanting to lose your comfortable life. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she just shook her head. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just trying to hold on to something because I'm scared. Scared of what? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Of losing everything, she whispered. Of losing you. I wanted to laugh, to shout, to tell her how pathetic she sounded. But looking at her, seeing her sitting there, broken and vulnerable, I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but there was something else, something quieter, almost sad. What did you think would happen, Lila? I asked, my voice softer. Did you think I'd just find out and move on? That we could pretend it never happened? She shook her head, tears spilling down her face. No, I didn't think it through. I didn't think about anything except myself. And I hate myself for it. I hate that I hurt you, hurt us. I don't know who I am anymore. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through, the memories, the love, the trust that had once been so strong. And now, looking at her, all I saw was a stranger. Maybe that's the problem, I said quietly. Maybe we don't know each other anymore. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, like she was seeing me for the first time. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we've been living this life, going through the motions, but we lost sight of each other a long time ago. I paused, feeling a strange sense of clarity. Maybe it was always going to end like this. She shook her head, her voice trembling. No, don't say that. We can still try. I sighed, feeling the weight of my own words. Maybe we can. But I don't know if it's enough, Lila. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing silently. I wanted to comfort her, to reach out and tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't. Not after everything. We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us saying a word. Finally, she looked up, her eyes swollen, her face pale. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I don't know. Maybe we try counseling. Maybe we try to find a way back. Or maybe we just let go. She nodded, her face blank, as if she was too exhausted to feel anything anymore. Is that what you want? I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't just forgive you and pretend this never happened. I need time. I need space to figure out what I want. She nodded again, wiping her tears. Okay. I understand. We sat in silence again, the reality of our situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. The house felt empty, the walls closing in, the memories that once filled this place now tainted by betrayal and pain. Finally, I stood up, breaking the silence. I think I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. She didn't argue. She just nodded, looking down at her hands, her face hollow. Okay. I walked out of the room, my mind numb, my heart heavy. As I made my way down the hall, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. But there was no joy in it, no sense of victory. Just a hollow emptiness, a feeling of loss that I couldn't shake. I lay in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. I knew that things would never be the same, that we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. And I wondered if maybe, in some twisted way, this was exactly what we both needed, a clean break, a chance to start over, separately. But even as I thought it, I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of regret that ran deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I didn't want to let go of everything we'd built, everything we'd shared. But I also knew I couldn't stay, couldn't pretend to forgive, couldn't keep living a lie. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Lila was gone, a note left on the kitchen counter, I need some time too. I'll be at my sister's for a few days. Maybe it's best for both of us to take a break. I stared at the note, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I knew this was probably the best thing, a chance to get some space, to figure out what I wanted, what we both wanted. But it didn't make the emptiness any easier to bear. Over the next few days, I tried to keep busy, tried to focus on work, on the kids, on anything that would keep me from thinking about her, about us. But every time I walked into the house, every time I saw something that reminded me of her, I felt that hollow ache all over again. I thought about calling her, about asking her to come back, to try and work things out. But every time I picked up the phone, I stopped myself, unsure if that was really what I wanted. Then, one evening, as I was sitting alone in the quiet of the empty house, I realized something. I'd spent so much time trying to hold on to something that was already broken, something that maybe had been broken for a long time. And maybe it was time to let go. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him I was ready to proceed with the divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. And as I signed the papers, I felt a strange sense of peace, a calm I hadn't felt in years. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that the road ahead would be long and painful. But for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own life, my own future. And as I walked out of that office, the weight of everything finally lifted, I knew I was ready to start over. Alone, but free. The days after signing the divorce papers felt surreal. I thought there would be some immediate sense of relief, or maybe even regret, but instead, there was just emptiness. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Every creak, every soft hum from the appliances seemed louder, more pronounced, as if the silence itself was trying to fill the void left behind. The kids took the news hard. I had expected that, but nothing really prepares you for those kinds of conversations. They asked all the usual questions: why, what happened, if they'd done something wrong. And no matter how many times I reassured them that they were in no way to blame, I could see that they felt the loss. They were too young to understand the full weight of betrayal, but old enough to sense that something precious had been shattered. For the next few weeks, I tried to keep things as normal as possible for them. I picked them up from school, helped them with homework, cooked their favorite meals, anything to keep their routine steady, to make them feel secure. But every night, after I tucked them in, the walls seemed to close in on me. I'd sit in the dark, the silence pressing down, and wonder if there was anything I could have done differently. If there was some sign I'd missed, some way I could have saved what we had before it all went wrong. Lila came back a couple of times to see the kids. She'd always text ahead, making sure I wasn't home. At first, I found it strange that she avoided me so carefully, but soon I was grateful for it. The last thing I needed was another tense conversation or forced pleasantries. I could feel the kids getting anxious every time they knew she was coming, like they were trying to balance two worlds that no longer fit together. Eventually, I decided that the only way to move forward was to make a change, something big, something that would force me out of the rut I was sinking into. So, one weekend, after dropping the kids off at my parents' place, I went through the house with a box and started gathering things. Wedding photos, the artwork Lila had picked out, little knickknacks she'd collected over the years. Piece by piece, I removed anything that reminded me of the life we'd shared. By the time I was done, the house looked bare, almost unrecognizable. But I needed it that way. I needed to create a space that felt like mine, not a constant reminder of what I'd lost. I called a realtor a few days later. I wasn't sure if I was ready to sell, but I needed to know my options. She came over to look at the place, walking through each room, making notes, asking questions. After she left, I stood in the empty living room, feeling an odd mix of sadness and relief. This had been our home for years, the place where we'd built our family, our life. But now it felt like a hollow shell, stripped of everything that had once made it feel warm and alive. That night, I called my best friend, Matt. I hadn't really talked to him since everything happened, too embarrassed to admit what had gone wrong, too ashamed of how shattered I felt. But he didn't ask questions or press me for details. He just listened, offering his support in his usual, quiet way. "You know," he said finally, "you don't have to do this alone, man. Come by anytime. My door's always open." It was a simple offer, but it meant more than he probably realized. Just knowing there was someone out there who understood, who was willing to be there for me, gave me a glimmer of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. A week later, I made a decision. I'd been going through the motions, trying to keep things steady for the kids, but I knew I couldn't keep living in this in-between state. I needed a fresh start, a new beginning. I started by putting the house on the market. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the right thing to do. The realtor was optimistic, saying it would probably sell quickly, especially given the neighborhood. And with every visit, every open house, I felt a little more detached from the place, a little more ready to let go. The kids took it hard when I told them. They cried, asked if we really had to leave. And as I sat with them, explaining why this was important, I felt the weight of their sadness, their confusion. I knew it wouldn't be easy for them, that this house was filled with memories they didn't want to leave behind. But I also knew that staying here would only keep us all stuck in the past. Lila came by to talk about logistics, about how we'd handle things once the house was sold. She was calm, almost detached, as if she'd made her peace with everything. But I could see the tension in her face, the sadness she was trying to hide. There was no anger between us now, no harsh words. Just a quiet understanding that this was the end, that we were both moving on. The day the house sold, I packed up the last of our things, loading boxes into the car. The kids were quiet, watching as I went through each room, checking every drawer and closet. When we finally left, I felt a strange sense of freedom, as if a chapter of my life had been closed, sealed off, left behind. We moved into a smaller place a few miles away. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I let the kids pick out new furniture, decorate their rooms however they wanted. We spent the first few days unpacking, arranging things, making the space feel like home. And slowly, bit by bit, the sadness began to fade. We laughed more, shared meals without the heavy silence that had filled the old house. For the first time in months, I felt like we were moving forward, like we were building something new. I settled into a new routine, focusing on work, on the kids, on rebuilding my life. I joined a gym, started running again, reconnecting with parts of myself that I'd neglected for too long. I made an effort to see friends more often, to get out of the house, to do things that made me feel alive. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat outside, looking up at the stars, thinking about everything we'd been through, everything I'd lost. There was a sadness there, a sense of regret, but there was also peace. I'd come out the other side, stronger, more resilient, more aware of what mattered most. In time, Lila and I found a way to be civil, to co-parent without bitterness. It wasn't easy, but we both understood that the kids came first, that our personal feelings had to take a back seat. We didn't talk about the past, didn't rehash old arguments. We kept things simple, practical, focused on what was best for the kids. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The anger faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I still felt the sting of betrayal sometimes, still wondered how things could have been different. But I didn't dwell on it. I couldn't afford to. I had a new life to build, a new path to follow. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, watching a movie with the kids, when I realized that I was happy. Not in the way I used to be, not with the same innocence or blind faith. But in a deeper, more grounded way. I'd been through hell, been broken and betrayed, but I'd survived. And I was stronger for it. I still had bad days, days when the memories would resurface, when the pain would sneak back in. But they were fewer, farther between. I'd learned to let go, to forgive, not for Lila's sake, but for my own. Holding on to the anger, the resentment, only kept me chained to the past. And I was done with that. One day, out of the blue, Matt suggested I try dating again. I laughed, brushing it off, but the idea stuck with me. I wasn't sure if I was ready, if I could ever trust someone again. But I knew that I didn't want to be alone forever. I wanted to build something new, something real, with someone who would value me, respect me, the way I deserved. So, I signed up for a dating app, cautiously, reluctantly. I took it slow, swiping here and there, chatting with a few people. It was awkward, uncomfortable at first, but I kept at it, kept pushing myself to open up, to take a chance. After a few weeks, I met someone. Her name was Emma. She was kind, patient, with a quiet strength that reminded me of everything I'd lost and everything I wanted to find again. We took things slow, no rush, no pressure. We went on walks, had long conversations over coffee, got to know each other in a way that felt real, genuine. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. I didn't know where things with Emma would go, didn't know if we'd have a future together. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I'd found the courage to move forward, to open my heart again, to trust that there was still something good out there waiting for me. Looking back, I realized that everything I'd been through, every painful moment, every dark night, had led me to this place. I'd been forced to face my own strength, my own resilience, and I'd come out the other side stronger than I'd ever been. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, they were all part of the journey, part of what had made me who I was. And as I looked toward the future, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to live again, ready to build a life that was mine, on my own terms. In the end, I hadn't just survived, I'd thrived. And that, more than anything, was the greatest revenge I could have ever hoped for.